Hi and welcome back to a new video. On my table I have a super special motherboard. That is the ASUS ROG Crosshair 2006. It's a recent AMD AM5 motherboard, but in a retro design according to the Crosshair from 2006, 20 years ago. And so far I only saw the picture on the backside of the box and I'm already hyped. This could be one of the coolest motherboards I have seen in years. You need a lot of storage, but you don't want to spend a fortune, then take a look at Hetzner's Storage Box. It gives you flexible online storage that you can access from anywhere, using protocols like FTP, SMB, Resync or WebDev. So you can use it for backups as general data storage or as project archive. It runs on Hetzner servers in European data centers, is GDPR compliant, and you can easily upgrade or downgrade depending on how much storage you actually need. You can find all information through the link in the video description, and using the code DERBAUER15, new customers can save $15. The original ASUS Crosshair came to the market 20 years ago, and also at that time it was meant for AMD CPUs but for socket AM2. The high-end CPU you could buy in 2006 for this motherboard was an AMD FX62. Dual cores with 2 MB of cache, and for a price of around $1,000. The ASUS Crosshair AM2 cost about $230 back then. Taking inflation into account, the AMD FX62 from back then would cost $1,700 these days, and the ASUS Crosshair about $380. Because I'm often reading that everything became so much more expensive and back then it was much cheaper. That's only partially true. At least CPUs were already super expensive back then, but not everybody was jumping onto the high-end CPUs. I have the feeling that these days more people are buying the high-end CPUs. For motherboards, they definitely became more expensive, but they also change in how they look and what kind of technical features they have. The Crosshair AM2 is a completely different world. You can even see that there is not only PCI Express, but there are even the old PCI slots on the motherboard. The blue PCIe slots were dedicated for your GPU and were running with speed of PCI Express 1.0. If you're looking at the memory slots, you can see them in this white and blue design, and they were dedicated for DDR2. Comparing this to a motherboard from today, you can see all those covers that we have these days made from plastic, aluminium and everything, they are missing. Like even on the I/O shield, there is no cover on top. That definitely made boards cheaper back then. There is this big heat pipe solution that is going all across the motherboard, starting around the socket cooling the VRM, and then in the center it's cooling the north bridge, and on the bottom the south bridge. On the original Crosshair, what you would describe as a chipset was divided into two parts. So you had the south bridge on the bottom that was typically for input-output things such as SATA or LAN. And then the north bridge, which was sitting in between the CPU and the PCI Express slots, was the PCI Express controller, which is these days included into the CPU and no longer there. Back then, on the Crosshair, this was NVIDIA Enforce. That was needed to run SLI. That was a time, NVIDIA was actually making chipset for gaming motherboards, when they still cared about gamers and not running into the AI jungle. On the south bridge of the Crosshair, you can see the original ROG logo, surrounded by Republic of Gamers just written in full, and also the big G in the center. And what I find super cool is that, at least looking at a picture, the design is almost identical to back then. I'm absolutely hyped. And also even the packaging already looks like back then. Yeah, that is amazing. Just look at, we have the blue and white memory slots back. Even they paid attention to the blue PCIe slots. We don't have PCI back, which makes sense, so there's no white slots, but look at the beauty of those copper colored heatsinks. I have to get it out of the box. This is just super cool. The execution of this is absolutely perfect. I'm getting instantly retro vibes. They paid attention to very cool details, like we have again 2 PCI Express slots in blue for example, GPUs, then like SATA ports in blue. We have the memory slots in blue and white. And I was just talking about back then this heat pipe thing with the south bridge cooler on the bottom that was featuring the original Republic of Gamers logo, and it's exactly the same thing again here. Obviously this is, it's no longer a south bridge, it's X870E, and it's also I think cooled by actually this heatsink and not this one. This should be the cover for M.2 drives, but in general this is executed so nicely. It looks gorgeous. And then we have this copper style heatsink. I'm actually not quite sure if this is really copper. I would assume that it's aluminum and they just gave it a copper look. That is something I still have to check. But just the first impression, amazing. I'm impressed. In general, this is based on the Dark Hero, which means the PCB is identical. It wouldn't make sense to make a review to check all the features of the motherboard. It's the same as the Dark Hero. It's just the heatsink and appearance and like those retro features that were added. But in terms of like I/O and everything else, it's just purely based on the Dark Hero. That also means if we're going over to the I/O area, it's identical to the Dark Hero. Just some visual touches, like again, the original ROG logo. And I also want to point out the old Crosshair from 2006 had a small screen on the side here. That screen was like an extended postcode screen, which we still have today, just with the numbers. But back then, the one that was on the backside of the I/O also displayed some text like memory error or something like that. But what we got instead on this one, I think at least could be related to that, is here on the M.2 heatsink. I think this should be a 2-inch OLED. Definitely a cable attached to this heatsink. I'm quite sure that there's a screen underneath. The question might be what kind of memory modules you might want to use design-wise, but I guess just black would work with everything. I could imagine that taking this frame, for example, and paint it blue would look amazing, or if you have an AIO with LCD and have some kind of images that would align to the color scheme, that would definitely look pretty nice in a system. Okay, that is actually really cool. So that is the same kind of feature that was originally on the Crosshair here with this extra LCD. And now we have also the postcode on this extra OLED. I thought it's a great opportunity to get this one out and match the build. It's a 7800 GT Dual, and at least timing-wise, it's close to the original Crosshair, which was from 2006, and this one is from end of 2005. Just with design, you know, those like blue cables, kind of fits to the motherboard. However, I maybe cheated a little bit because I was using onboard graphics. You can't, unfortunately, use such an old GPU. It doesn't even have HDMI or DisplayPort, or you can't even install a driver, unfortunately. But I think a 4090 with this kind of color scheme might also fit with the blue. I went with a blue color scheme, but I'm not fully convinced. Not quite sure what would fit best to this. Yeah. Standalone, the motherboard looks quite nice. Pairing it with other items, it's probably a bit more difficult. I spent the last half hour to also test Prime 95, to at least do somewhat testing in this video. And you can see VRM temperature after half an hour of the 9800X 3D. So it's pulling about 140 watts under load, and you see temperature of 54 degrees Celsius on the VRM. So the temperatures are absolutely good, and that's also kind of expected. As I said before, this is all based on a Dark Hero, so I did not expect any kind of problems. Almost forgot about this earlier. As you can see, even the backplate is in this copper design. Just from a technical perspective, this is not a special board. It's a Dark Hero in a different design. But I have to say, this design is awesome. They hit my retro feeling. When I opened the box, I felt like going back in time. The design it just brings back memories, and that felt really nice. I enjoyed that. I enjoyed looking at this motherboard and testing it. And I have no clue what it costs. I assume that it's some kind of a limited thing, but I just simply don't know. I still hope you enjoyed this video. See you next time. Bye bye.